Ricky Hillson, thank you for joining me on Handpan Voices. It's lovely to see you finally getting this chat sorted out, isn't it?
Yes, the time change is always a tricky thing for my international students as well. So glad we figured it out.
It's not the first time I've messed up a time zone problem with an American player. I did the same with Sarah. She was waiting for me for an hour instead. So yeah, apologies. I rely on the wrong source, I think, to get the correct time right. I think I ask AI or whatever, and it always gets it wrong. I'm like, yeah, but you said it was... No, so yeah. So apologies, but here we are. We're
No
here.
problem. We're here.
Now, for some of the people that might not necessarily know your full background, I wonder if you could share like your origin story of the handpan and obviously the RAV that you're obviously also very well connected with, to give some people some feedback about, or some background.
Absolutely. Early on in my handpan journey, I was not very involved in the handpan world. I was online in the handpan.org forum, very active on there.
Yeah.
I was a high school teacher, so I wasn't able really to travel all over, and I was participating locally in things, but wasn't going to a lot of big events, but I was playing handpan. And then around 10 years ago, I got my first RAV, and this was right as Andre was building the first gen, which are the kind of the ones with the musical notes and the ohms in them.
Right.
And held on to that, started to go to more handpan events and made some connections. I opened for Nadashana one year in the US, and it kind of all snowballed from there. And eventually, as I was promoting my lessons and teaching, I was able to leave teaching English in a high school and move to just teaching online and performing in the US and holding classes and teaching ensembles. So it was a very natural progression for me. And also, my first instrument, I believe, was an dB handpan or an overtone handpan. And the overtone handpan was a second-hand handpan that was like this. I've never seen a handpan like this since then, but very pot-bellied, almost like somebody overextended the shell. So when you're going for the eighth note, you had to literally jump over the top to get to the other side. Yeah. But it was a great instrument, so no complaints. Back in the early days, a tuned trash can would go for $3,000. So you would take whatever you would get back then. So,
who taught Ricky Hillson to play the handpan? Did you teach yourself like most of the other original players?
Yeah, I was online and creating sort of educational content before there was any information on how to play. I think Colin Folk had a DVD or something back then that people could buy. But I came from the guitar string instrument world. So early on, it was very unusual. Most people were percussion-oriented players. As soon as I got into the handpan, into the RAV, I was thinking, how can I write a song on this? How can I make it a guitar or make it a piano or another string instrument? So I, just through experimentation and pulling my guitar and sitar and oud skills to the handpan, I kind of was able to develop a style through that.
The oud. What an amazing little instrument that is, for sure. That was a lovely little natural progression then from teaching English online. How did it feel, Ricky, that first day when you decided I'm going to be a music teacher instead of an English teacher? How was that feeling?
It was a good feeling. I think my goal when I had entered college was to be an ethnomusicologist. That was my real passion. And I decided I'm not going to make any money doing that. I don't know if I'll be able to make a living. So I ended up teaching English because I also am an avid reader as well. But it was a scary thing to move from a very steady income of working in a school for 10 years to, putting yourself online and promoting your work and your teaching. But I waited until I felt like I had enough of a clientele that I could make the swap. And I was confident enough at that point to transition to that and not be too worried about it, thankfully.
Making the leap of faith. Some people say that until you decide to do it as a job, you don't treat it as a job, and then all of a sudden it's a job, and then it starts to happen for you. Now, teaching and learning of something that you want to do as a passion or a hobby, as in you're not learning English to learn let's not get into the whole world of learning, but
the educational system.
The specific reason of learning a musical instrument, right? So you obviously teach, and you perform everywhere. How do you define the difference between playing for joy, for the love of it, and for practicing with purpose to be better?
I think a lot of the struggles that students and just players in general have is finding the difference between the two.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that come to my work are very technically skilled, but they don't know how to use those techniques in context. So I think the important part for people that are learning is to spend as much time just playing and writing, creating, improvising, and then 50% working on a piece, putting the skills in context. Because until you can use a skill in context, it's in the handpan world, it's kind of beautiful noise, which is totally fine. I love beautiful noise, but for a lot of people, they feel like I could do more with this thing that I know.
Yeah.
So I'm always encouraging people, if they're improvising, to try to pull whatever they created in their improv free play into something more structured. It's kind of like if you always picked up a flute and you just put your fingers randomly down, you'd be better at putting your fingers down and, making up a little something. But repeating things and layering things, even if you're a yoga meditation player, it just makes your life a lot easier. And you can still be as free as you want. One of the things I often tell people too is, if they're opposed to organizing their playing, say you have 40% of a piece sketched out in your head, and then you leave enough open where, if you're an improviser, all right, in this section, I'm going to do whatever I want related to where I am in the composition, and then I'm going to move somewhere else. And so you can kind of build around an order, but still keep it wide open for creativity.
We'll probably touch on this when we talk about composition and composing music. But personally, the problem I have at the moment, and this is not me trying to get a cheeky lesson out of you, by the way, it's an example. I've come up with, I was playing, went on holiday, had an instrument on my lap, was very inspired about the environment that we're in, came up with a beautiful melody, gave it a name, started practicing, got some chord progressions around it. But it always feels like where I start is the middle, not the beginning. And it's that, isn't it? That's what you're talking about, is like, here's the joy, here's the idea. Now try and fit that into a start, middle, and end with a composition. And that's the reason why you need both elements, right?
Absolutely. And the way you discover new portions of a song is by kind of improvising around the idea that you have. And then maybe you discover the beginning, maybe you discover the chorus, maybe you discover the end of the song. But it's easy to get stuck either in a pattern of play where you're like, when I sit down, I play this particular thing, or get stuck in a way of writing. It's easy to get in these traps because it's something we do for enjoyment. So our body goes to the last thing that was enjoyable and felt good when we sit down to play oftentimes.
In your experience, Ricky, do you think it's a good place to start playing for fun and then move into a more of a practice session? Or do you sit down with the intention of a practice session, or does that vary from student to student?
It definitely varies from student to student. My recommendation for people, and it could be an American cultural thing as well, but I feel like if people don't make it play and they think about it as practice, some personalities lose the joy of picking it up and working on something. Yeah. So how I try to frame it for people and for myself, because if I was sitting down to practice something, I might avoid it, which is silly, but it's just human nature to avoid things. If you're practicing, you want to avoid it oftentimes. But I always try to think of play. I'm playing one of my songs. If I'm looking to refine something or write a new portion, if I think about it as play, it's not that sort of schoolmaster obligation of like, you're going to do this drill and you're going to do these rolls and these fills. It's a little thing, but it seems to work for a lot of personalities that are opposed to practicing and making time. Because it feels better if you sit down like, I'm going to go play my handpan, and you happen to be playing the thing you're working on. But if you're not practicing it, it's not like, I have to sit down and work on the piece that I have to play for next week. It seems to work for some personalities.
Some personalities like myself, and I'm not put myself in the same bracket as Amy Naylor, but me and Amy seem to share the same idea of when she first wakes up in the morning, when her brain is still half as awake, if you like, she just plays, gets the handpan on her lap, and simply just plays. Doesn't think, doesn't allows the non-organizational brain to sort of take over and do that. I do it at the end of the day instead. I turn off all the lights. And I set a timer and I play for 40 minutes before I go to bed, or 30 minutes or whatever with a timer, just to improve my touch, my connection, and listen. I love listening to the notes and the relationships between the notes and the sounds that I can make.
You bring up a good point too. I think scheduling time. If you're a busy person, scheduling to, like, in the morning I play, in the evening. I think that's important for people if they want to progress, to have like a committed time, even if it's you do whatever you want, you just free play, you work on something. I think a lot of people need that consistency in order to progress.
I'm sure you've heard this question many times before, Ricky. The next one. I haven't got enough time. I've only got 15 minutes in the day. I can only fit 15 minutes in the day for my practice. What should I do, Ricky? If they only have 15 minutes, if they only have that little moment before the kids wake up, or before they have to go and pick up the kids from school or whatever, they've got a very small time, which is probably not enough for a daily practice. What do you suggest to students if they've only got that short time to practice for that a day?
If they're working with one of the teachers that I'm also friends with, where you are, or here, myself, or other people, I think taking the 15 minutes, half of that time playing something that's organized, maybe that you saw online or you were working on with someone, and the rest of it, improvise around it. Because I think a well-rounded player has kind of a 50-50 approach where you're creating and you're also practicing something. I think scale, if you're a new player, running up and down the scale is okay. I'm a big proponent of technique and context, though. So if I'm going to run up and down the scale, I would rather do an exercise that sounds like a song, because I'm eventually going to want it to sound like a song. Okay. So maybe one of the song-based exercises that people offer online as well, and myself as well.
And how do you feel about people learning to a metronome? Are you a big fan of the metronome?
I grew up with, I didn't really grow up in a musical family at all. My sister played piano when I was younger and had a metronome on constantly. And I learned to despise the metronome growing up. My technique for people, there's many people that hate the metronome as well. If you look up D minor backtrack, A minor backtrack, D major back, you can pick the beats per minute. So it's kind of like having a metronome, but it forces you to listen melodically, or you can ignore it and just listen to the timing of it. And that feels so much better for people oftentimes if they don't want to hear, the click, click, click of a metronome.
Yeah.
Not everybody is born with an innate sense of rhythm. People can learn rhythm. Not everybody is born with an innate sense of melody. So sometimes people have both, sometimes people have none, sometimes people have one or not the other. For people that are looking to play with others, especially, being aware of timing is important. Like if you and I were to play together, we both have to have some ability to listen to something and then put myself in context with that. So,
yeah. Ricky, is there one thing when you're teaching students that you think they overlook or they move on to too quickly when they're learning how to play the handpan?
I think the quality of strikes is important for people, because you can go very far into playing and be a really messy player, or a player that is using these, I always call it velociraptor playing, when people are using really big motions like a dinosaur. And that this is important, and I bring this up just because my mother was an occupational therapist, so I heard about hands all the time. We really have to be careful of our hands playing the handpan because we're hitting a big steel sheet. So I think spending the time to get the quality of sound you want, and also being low to the instrument early on, building good habits, strike habits, I think are really important, because you compound the messiness the more advanced you get if you haven't refined that skill. And you also compound the stress on your fingers if you're really like coming at a bad angle or reaching your hands up really high. So,
you're spot on there, because it was pointed out to me that my hands were like, I was being very animated and very sort of artistic and thinking it's the way to be. But you're right, you're actually creating this more of a downward movement. They're in the wrong places on your shoulder and your elbow and your wrist, and really that sort of, like you said, the control over the wrist and the gentleness and is attenuated when you are closer to the instrument. That is a
one tip I'll just throw out there, just because I have this for people. The sort of metric I always give to people, this isn't a handpan, but imagine it's a handpan, is I'm striking from about one hand's length away. That's in general where my hands are, and following the contour, whether you have a 20-note instrument or you have a 10-note instrument, following the contour of the instrument as you're striking and pushing past your resting point. A lot of people do this like rigid hand thing, and it's hard to get a good sound out of it, but that level is not going to put any stress on your joints or anything. So just a tip for people.
So you, like you mentioned right at the start, Ricky, you've got a passion for songwriting,
right?
And playing the instruments is important to create songs. And I've obviously heard you sing songs and play songs. And in your songwriting work, how much is devoted to the structured practice against like the spontaneous? Oh, hello. Spontaneous? What does that mean? I'll try that question again.
I like that.
What I mean, spontaneous. That sounds like a Roman.
It does. It's very Greek or Roman sounding. Yeah.
I am spontaneous.
I like it.
We have to laugh. Spontaneous is my my Roman name today.
I think it's a good name, actually.
Yeah.
You should save it. You should save it.
Well, we can talk a lot about your teaching, and I'm sure we will come back to it later on. But I'm really interested in how you create songs. What's your songwriting process? It's obviously an important part of your life, writing and singing and playing songs. So if you could sort of share with me a little bit more about your personal songwriting process, Ricky.
Of course. If it happens in a couple different ways. It's partially colored by my guitar experience. I grew up playing guitar and writing music, and I was always interested in original music. I spent very little time engaging with covers. So the magic of playing was the creative process, whatever that is. I don't care what's coming out of me. If I'm creating something, it feels good to me. So it can begin sometimes as I'm playing something else, or I'm playing one of my own pieces, and I play something a little differently, and I follow that thread of a melody. I'm like, I like this. I'm connecting with this. I'll always record yourself playing. I always say this to all of my students. If you're creating and you're just free playing, record yourself. I know it feels like it takes you out of the moment. It's worth it, because I cannot tell you the number of times I've not hit record and I've come up with something that I thought was absolutely amazing. And despite having an audiographic memory, I'll lose it because I was in the moment and wasn't, scripting it in that spot in my brain.
Do you mean just like via audio, just with like an audio app on your phone, or do you
it's your voice recorder on your phone? Yep, just to have enough to reference it, to be able to play it back or tab it out if you want to tab it out eventually. So sometimes it comes from a melody. Other times, and not quite as frequently, it comes from a rhythm, and then I'm building something around that structure. You can actually tell usually in listening to players, and this is kind of a good practice for people listening. Try to listen to people's music and see what leads their writing process. So An example of this is, I would say Amy, myself, and Rosie. You can hear that there's a melodic chordal driving sense from all of our music, because we have musical backgrounds that are broad, beyond the handpan. People that have percussion backgrounds are often driven by percussion. They still have the chord and melody involved in it, but the driving force is more of the rhythm. Like Cabasau could be an example of that. And there's people like Dan Mulqueen that are kind of a mix of both. He's kind of using chords in a percussive way. You can blend all of those together, but the main avenues are either through percussion and then building from a rhythm, through a chord progression and finding what connects to those that I have, or finding a melody, pursuing that thread and building the rhythm and chords out from that.
Have you got like a specific song that you've done recently that you wrote and you think, oh, that worked really well. Gosh, that was a surprise. I'm going to do that differently next time. You know, do you sort of go back and review it? You know, talk to me about through the process about locking down a song. Because when I spoke to Dan, he seems to struggle on being happy with the song. You know, like he is working it and working it and working it. So, you know, how do you review what you've done? Are you quite disciplined in that fact? I mean, tell me a bit of an example if you've got one.
I spend a lot of time playing my own music, and I think I often am modifying it to feel the way I want it to feel in the moment. I've been playing so long now that a lot of my older pieces I've kind of rewritten to feel the way I want them to feel in the modern age. You know, they're 15 years old or something. I want them to feel kind of like I feel now.
Yeah.
In terms of working on, I'm very structured in one sense, and I'm also in the Jack Kerouac stream of consciousness is better sense, where if I write something in the moment and it feels really special and good in that moment, I'll keep the primary structure of that, but sort of the semantic, smaller components of that, I'm open to changing. There's a place that happens for people where once they write a piece, and I'm sure Dan talked about this as well, you can get in this loop of needing to constantly edit it because you think like, oh, this isn't right. And then oftentimes you'll find that after all of these modifications, the end result is close to the first result. You know, so you're like, come back in a circle to where you were before. It's like, oh, this was actually okay as it began. So I think for me, being open to review things and listen for where my body and the melody might want to lead from that is a useful practice. But I try not to spend too much time thinking, is this good enough? Because my only objective is to write things that I enjoy. So if I'm enjoying them, that's it. I don't write music for other people. I don't really think much about how people will perceive things. I just like to write. And for me, the satisfaction is the creative process, but I'm not too worried about the minutiae of it sometimes. It depends on the piece. But
let's dissect that word right, using for handpan. Because tablature in the handpan world is, you know, there's a few things out there that you can do. I've noticed, obviously being involved in a site like Master the Handpan and people who teach online, they have a very specific, and Amy does this as well. This is how you play your notes. This is the order. This is the where you strike the notes, and this is how you learn a song.
Right.
Now that's how people I see teach the how to play, but not necessarily how they write their own music. So how do you technically write the song? Do you just play and repeat, remember, or do you have your own sort of tablature way of actually physically, with a pen or a computer, write down your song somehow so you could go back to it?
So when I am sitting down to sort of tab out a song, I often have all of my material pre-tabbed for lessons because I'm teaching song-based lessons. So I'm drawing from my own material to teach. And I found for students, having the ability to tab out their work allows them to have one layer of separation from their playing so they can actually look at and then physically modify a piece. There are many pieces of mine that I've written out that evolved because I spent the time to tab them out.
Yeah.
And it seems like extra effort for people when they're just starting. But if you're someone that's interested more in the writing end of playing, taking the time to learn some tab system, whether it's mine or other people's, it allows you to work on your pieces in a way that removes you a little bit from the physicality of playing. So you can have ideas that you wouldn't have if you were sitting down at the handpan and playing something out at the same time. I have an audiographic memory, so I'm remembering my material from back when I was 13 and playing guitar. So until I started to teach full time, I didn't spend a lot of time tabbing things out, but I do, again, recording everything that you can on your phone or your computer is a great way of holding on to those thoughts, because it's hard to, when you're in the flow of playing, it's hard to recall what you've played oftentimes. Even in a performance, I'll be like, oh, I really liked how I did this in this song. And maybe I couldn't recall that because I was so involved in the performance. So,
but when you say tab, are you writing with a pen in a book, or are you creating a document on a computer?
Because I teach through Zoom. Zoom has a surprisingly well-suited whiteboard feature. So when I'm teaching a lesson, I'm doing it out on the Zoom whiteboard. And if I was on the go, I would tab it out maybe. But I've used the Zoom whiteboard so much that that's just my go-to tabbing space.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a numeric system that I use. It's kind of divided by rhythm and stressed beat. So if it was like a 6-beat sort of thing, I would have 6 beats in a line. I would have the stressed beat in a particular color, and I would have sort of the root or melodic note labeled in it. It's pretty simplistic, but it's very much like a guitar tab, and I find it works well for me and my students as well.
Slow down a little bit more. Let's cut the speed in half. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Let's pivot and talk about Rewild Your Soul, and when you have a group of students, right? It's not always about one-to-one. Being online, you've obviously got a lot of experience and success with teaching groups of people.
Yeah.
With those vast amount of lovely instruments you've got in the background there, Ricky.
It is pretty inspiring.
The big hoarder that Ricky Hillson must be.
What happens when it becomes transitions from a hobby to a profession? You can justify.
We'll talk about half of those in the background. Yeah. Well, not all of them, because we'll be here all day, wouldn't we? But tell me about your, what would a new player or somebody new joining one of your groups, what would they experience? How do you incorporate a new player? To get them involved in what you're doing, and how do you teach them in a group?
It's interesting in sort of, I actually just finished an ensemble class for the SUE New York Handpan School, and we learned one of the pieces that I wrote for that ensemble and performed it at Lighthouse Handpan Gathering in New York. But when people are entering sort of a group, there's two versions of this. In an ensemble, there's usually higher level players. There's also new players in there as well. But there's this interesting phenomenon that happens in ensembles where if you're a beginner player, you're around people able to do it right away. So oftentimes just being in that atmosphere, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I see what's happening next to me. So in that case, when people already know, it's easier for those beginner players to kind of jump up the skill level ladder faster. For big group classes, like say I go to Boston or New York and teach a 30-person handpan class, we usually do a composition that is accessible to lower or beginner players, not lower players, but beginner players, and people that have more skills. And by the end of it, it kind of all evens out, because even if people are struggling, most of the people end up getting the composition enough or that the group still feels cohesive. Even if somebody's struggling and just playing one note at a time, it kind of all comes together after a couple hours. So I think picking the right composition and reading the room is really important. I may be like, this is the thing we're going to work on. I have this composition I want to work. I teach them. And it doesn't sometimes work depending on the skill level. Because if you host a big class, you don't know who's coming to it. So it could be 30 brand new players. It could be 30 advanced players. So I think having enough material to adapt to the clientele and the classes is really important. And people usually will be pulled to being able to actually play that piece by the end of the class. And people are very supportive in group classes. I'm a very not drill master type personality.
Yeah.
And my goal really is to bring people into some of the joy that I feel playing as well. And I want them to feel included, and I want them to feel engaged. And I'm not someone that needs to prove anything to anybody. So I want everybody to feel on the same level as me and equal and, comfortable in that scenario when they're learning. So
I remember when I did my beginner course with Meridian, I think with Amy maybe, or Marquetta, who's from Meridian Handpans, and it is a truly wonderful feeling, that first moment when you're playing an instrument you've never played before with other people.
yes,
And you're playing
magic.
along with each other, and you've got that little, wow, this is actually, I'm actually doing it. This is actually happening. It's such a lovely feeling, isn't it?
It is.
And I'm sure people say that to you on a regular basis.
Yeah. It's interesting too. There's a different type of magic to group handpan events. When you hear 20 handpans playing together, it becomes a different thing than just you and I playing in our rooms and recording. It somehow feels more orchestral, or just transforms into a different experience for people when they hear that, I think. So
I love this idea. I keep thinking about this idea of having like a handpan band. I think Capassal talks about it. There's all these lovely different levels of handpans, right? You've got the F2s, the D2s, the A2s, the bass guitars. And then you have like this more sort of newer ones that are coming out are really high. And then you've got like people that could do the chords. And then you've got people that can play the lead melody. Yeah. So you can like effectively create like a band, like a normal band with a group of handpan players, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's so much potential for group handpan playing, whether it's an ensemble or whether it's with other instruments. Handpan is interesting because it melds with whatever instrument you play it with. It's one of the few instruments that works in pretty much I haven't heard a style that I haven't liked hearing handpan in before.
Yeah.
So the collaborative end of handpan playing, whether it's with other handpan players or with other musicians, I still think is not very investigated. So I think that's how we're going to see the handpan move further, is when musicians take the handpan in a little bit more. And by musicians, I mean people who don't play the handpan yet, that encounter it. It's actually something that I've been trying to convince Rav to do for a while, is not just advertise to the meditation yoga community, who I love, I'm very involved with them, but also to people who are just guitar players or drummers, and show them like you can do something related to what you already do on this instrument. And I see the handpan evolving in that direction eventually as well. So
I'd love to hear handpans being promoted as a bass pan, or a lead pan, or instead of just this is a decode and we want it to do everything, like a 22 note that will do everything. Why can't it be promoted as, you could buy, if you like playing the bass guitar or you like playing deep and melodical, you could be the bass element of a handpan band. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. In my community, we always sort of joke that there's the perception that you need to have 25 notes in order to be a better player. And oftentimes, if you can't play 25 is not going to help you. So it's like, if you're not writing with 9 notes, you're not going to write with 25. But I like your idea though, because then that compartmentalizes some of that task. So it would actually make it more accessible to different skill levels, because they're like, oh, you're doing the bass part, you're doing the lead guitar. I like that concept a lot, actually. I think that's kind of neat.
You're welcome. You can run
I like it. We'll collaborate further on that.
I would definitely play the bass. I mean, I've got an F2 low pygmy, so that's what I'd be happy just to do the bass tones in the background, and let that person, that little kid or whatever wants to freestyle and do all the riffs and stuff, let them crack on. Why does everybody have to do that bit? You know what I mean? Because it just gets too noisy, right?
Right.
Now, you mentioned Rav there. And let's talk about Rav Labs. For people who don't necessarily know, it's not a company that makes. Well, let's detract that, because they did.
Yeah, they did at one point. Yeah.
Tell people about Rav Labs, your relationship with them, and how maybe their instruments differentiate differently from the standard handpan, for example?
Definitely. RAV started in the same vein, and actually on the handpan.org forums that I mentioned in the beginning, Andre was present on there. Andre wanted to build a handpan, and at that point, there were no resources on how to build a handpan. I know Victor Levinson was tuning in his country, but
Which
he didn't
country is
have the
that for
capacity.
people? Which country is that?
Russia.
Right.
And they're in Perm Russia, and now they have they have a factory in Serbia as well. So I think they're doing most of their EU shipping from Serbia. But when Andre first got involved, wanted to build a handpan, had vague success, but he had a background in engineering and had access to a program that allowed him to. It was like an aviation style CAD program that would let him test when planes were in the air what the sort of vibration limit was for steel. So he used this program in order to what would happen if I wanted to make this an A-net? What would be the vibrating capacity? Which is it's such an amazing thing. And he actually, I have the first gen right here. He was able in the first try to make, this was the third one that he made, in the first try to make an instrument that was very different than the Hank drum and the tank drums of that era. And I believe he was the first one to put harmonics into a tongue. I mean, maybe someone else in the US had done it, but in this style at least. And from this point, it was only about a year or so until he went to the RAV Vast, which is thicker, larger.
Right.
And early on, they were kind of marketing it as a handpan alternative. RAVs aren't handpans, but they don't need to be handpans because they're beautiful in their own way. It's like, they're related by shape and tunings and stuff. But so I actually got involved with them pretty much right when they got started. I talked to Andre a couple times, and somehow, actually, Felix Vasterman would be a good person for you to talk to sometime. We were two of the earliest people to be posting RAV-related stuff on the internet. We met through the YouTube, actually, seeing each other's videos, because there was only a handful of RAV videos. And eventually, I sort of evolved into becoming friends with a lot of the makers, and then it evolved into working with them and marketing and creating scales. And just like everything else, that's the biggest takeaway, I think, for people in this conversation is just following whatever threads appear in front of you, even if they're like little things. I was good at following threads, and that led to opportunities oftentimes. And I think they appear more frequently than we notice. But in following that thread with RAV, it just kind of evolved into them making handpans at one point, and now the Anima is their current iteration. But it's an amazing instrument that's existing in parallel with the handpan, but is its own thing, has a related community, but its own community as well. And I think for a while, the RAV was a more affordable version of a handpan for people because it was half the price of a handpan 5 years ago, and that's changing now. Handpans are less expensive, obviously, so they're more accessible, but they're beautiful in their own right. I've always been against the marketing of, it's a handpan alternative, but it's its own beautiful instrument in its own way.
I distinctly remember liking the sound but not liking it enough to committing to want to buy one and needing to hear it for myself. So I went to Hangout UK in 2024 and somebody had one. I placed it on my lap. I struck a note and I knew instantly that I loved it and I wanted to play it. And I think what people, especially on the internet, don't allow is that thought, that mindset of, well, it doesn't sound as good as the handpad from such and such maker or whatever. I'm not interested. But believe you me, from my own personal limited experience, I've only been around for sort of 2 or 3 years, I appreciate. But it was as soon as I had that instrument on my lap with the resonance coming up through my lap and into my face and through my chest, I thought, yeah, I get it straight away. They are different. The resonance to me is its joy, is its magic.
Yeah.
And you can control that anyway, right? You can control the resonance. And so, and their new iteration, the Anima, with their chords, 5 chords around the middle. You mentioned earlier about, coming from a melodic background or like a guitar background. It feels like to me, like Amy is very similar to you with, like, as you said about writing songs. It feels like it's an instrument created for a guitar player.
Absolutely.
Like it's very similar, right? Like you have these chords and you have the melody, and that skill set would cross over really well, right?
It's true. I think they've finally taken the leap to marketing to musicians. Not that this couldn't be used for yoga meditation, but I think it was a very smart move because it satisfies people that are wanting to play something a little bit more than the 9 or 10 notes that we have usually on a handpan or a RAV. And they've picked a chord progression that is one of the most common series of chords. So pretty much any popular song has at least most of those chords in it. So it's going to open a whole new realm for people to do covers. For me as a writer, it's, I can already tell from my playing it over the last month or so. Actually, I have it right here. There's going to be people are going to get stuck in some chord progressions, but it's just a great scale. It's as revolutionary, I would say, as the RAV first was when he first put the RAV into the space. And I actually just finished a course for this, which is available. It's available now, actually, but it's unusual. I have this much forewarning of a scale. Usually, I find out a couple weeks before it's released, but for once, I have a couple months, so I have enough time to capture make a new album, which is going to come out soon, and also a course for this before it releases. So.
In your experience so far, Ricky, playing it for a month, have you found that you have to play it differently than you would play a normal standard RAV? Based on the fact that they have the 5 chords already there on the top that you strike with one finger, instead of creating them with multiple hands and multiple fingers. Are you playing it in a different way, or is it just the same, a different, explain to me how you think it might be played differently than a standard, if you think it is.
I think people that have experience with RAVs are going to fall into the camp of, I just have 5 dings now. I think they're going to think like, oh, it's a 5-ding RAV. If you choose to use it in the way that I've used it on the album that I just recorded, you also can think about it as the chord progressions are organizing your thinking in the same way you and I might use dyads and triads to kind of tell our brain we're changing chords and moving around. And it kind of changes your focus from being on the sides to support whatever's happening to the center can support the melody on the rest of the instrument. So I'm not having to always jump to a dyad to hint to my brain like, oh, we're changing from this chord progression to this one. So I think that's different because the tendency at first is going to be, again, people using it as 5 dings, but I think ultimately people are going to realize that you can kind of hold down the progression part with the center and fill in melodically on the sides. In some ways, it's actually similar to what I was talking about playing with a backtrack in the right key. It's almost like you can create the backtrack in the center, and then the rest of the scale is open to you to write on, because all of the notes work in relationship to the chords in the center. So it's really cool. I have picked it up multiple times a day, every day since I've gotten it. So it's very fun.
I had a go on Amy's when I was seeing it in her studio, and I was gobsmacked with the actual just the how beautiful the tones are.
Yeah.
that come from those
Yeah.
chords as well. Not just that they're there and they're easier to play, but how absolutely wonderful they sound and very
Yeah.
different. Weirdly, I
Yeah.
don't know how he's done that. The next question is, like, from a handpan enthusiast's point of view, you think,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is a scale, and surely they're going to make other scales as animas, but is that now different? Because it's like those five major chords are already in there, like you said, the five major chords for most pop music.
Yeah.
So they're not going to make a range of different animas for different, based on different scales, are they? Or how will that go, do you think? What's the future of anima?
I think I don't have any direct info on that. I will tell you they sent some chord samples initially to myself and a couple other people to help pick. I didn't know what I was picking back then, but to help pick that chord progression in the center. So I've heard other examples of chord progressions that they've picked. So I think this was what they settled on as working with. It has like a Celtic outer part, and then obviously the chord progression in the center. So I would imagine they're going to have one that's more brooding, and I think the tricky part is going to be to find a scale or a combination of notes that matches all of the chords in the center.
Yeah,
that's the challenge. Exactly. Is like, how do you? It's going to take a lot of R&D, I think, for them to be able to do it again. But they're always working on new projects. I don't spend as much time getting their random side projects now, but things like the Marmara. The Marmara was in a trash can in their factory. And when I was pretty good friends with one of the social media people, and I was like, hey, if you have any weird things around, I'm happy to try them. Yeah. So I'm sure there are similar ones where they're like, didn't quite work on the Anima, that maybe it'll pop up in the future in a different format. So
to finish off talking about RAV, let's talk about there is a more of a cheaper price entry point instrument as well, which has come out recently, called the Rav Moon. Let's talk about the Rav Moon and what you feel about it, and the differences between the RAV Vast and what it means to you as an instrument, perhaps what it is.
I actually think the Moon is probably an even better fit for people in the meditation, yoga, sound healing realm, because it's if you think the RAV is harmonic rich, the Moon is way more harmonically oriented. It has a different type of sustain as well. The RAVs and the Anima as well are all kind of vibrating as one piece, and then it has the individual pieces vibrating. Because they changed the way the Moon's laid out, it's vibrating like this, because there's two hemispheres that are vibrating back and forth. So the quality of sound is completely different than the RAV. It feels related, but the appeal is that it has longer sustain than the RAV. The disadvantage for some people, if they want to play quickly, is it's an instrument that you kind of have to take time with. You can't. The complaint even early on in the handpan world, when stainless steel became popular, is like, the sustain's too long, it's not usable, and now everybody plays stainless steel instruments. So maybe this will happen with the Moon. Everyone's going to be like, oh, the sustain's too long, and then everyone's going to love it. But I think it's better for slower playing. I like to bring them when I'm hiking or something, because I'd much rather carry something this big versus something that's this huge handpan or something with me.
Yeah.
And it is a fantastic entry point for that realm. That's the good thing about RAVs, and there's lots of other great makers too, but they're a professional entry point at whatever price point you're picking them up at. So. And it prepares you. I always joke with my students too, because inevitably, if you have a handpan, you probably get a RAV. And if you have a RAV, you probably get a handpan eventually. RAV players, because they're used to hitting in a particular spot, often are quicker handpan players than handpan players that haven't played the RAV yet and go to play the RAV. Because the handpan is more flexible a little bit and where you can strike on the tone field. There's obviously preferred areas. So I find the transition for RAV players to handpan is usually very, very quick. So you're preparing yourself for that if you end up wanting to go down that journey eventually too.
I would like to spend some more time on the moon for sure.
Yeah.
Now, you said the phrase there, beginner entry point.
Mm-hmm.
The entry points into the world of handpans, let's go back to the handpans in the world, are changing. And this is why me and you are having this conversation, because we started to have a bit of back and forth about certain attitudes online of the whole community about the emergence of the Chinese manufactured handpans in the world coming to the world that weren't there a long time ago.
Right.
When they first turned up, they were anyway. Let's not talk about when they first turned up.
Mm-hmm.
You came out with a very specific video that resonated with me and made me realize that we were all, not all of us, but most of the people that played a handpan already were very subtly looking down our noses at people buying these instruments, rightly or wrongly. And this is the way I was dealing with it myself personally. But what I did realize, and what I realized very quickly after you very succinctly made that video, is all the keyboard warriors on all the forums and all of the internet, mostly Facebook, just literally launching into people. That's not a real handpan. Don't buy that trash. Why are you wasting your money? Really belittling people about they've bought something because that's what they can afford.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah. Or they don't know any better or whatever. So this is a huge topic, I know.
Where
do we start, Ricky? How do I ask you a question? Okay. Why did you make that video, and what's your personal opinion about this situation?
I really, as somebody that didn't have the money for an expensive handpan for a very long time, I would have given anything to buy a piece of junk. All the worst handpans 10 years ago are 1,000 times worse than the worst handpans now. Like you could play a $100, it's not going to be great, but you can play a $100 handpan nowadays. And I think my focus has always been on community building and getting people involved with the instrument wherever they're at. Like I said, my background is as a teacher. I worked in an alternative school with kids that were just kicked out of public school because they behaviorally didn't fit. And that really has tailored my desire to include people in things wherever they're at. And seeing the way people behave and treat these people that are like, oh, I'm so excited about my new instrument I got. Like, what do you think of it? Thinking they're going to get like support, and people just ripping them apart. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but that was my first experience in the handpan community. Okay. And I'm very empathetic to people that have that entry point, because I felt the same way when I first began, and it was over a different topic, but we won't create more drama around that. But so I'm empathetic to these people that are getting a false view of how the handpan community is. And Dan and I were just talking about this too, but the reality is the professional musicians, the professional teachers, and whatever you can call professional, whatever you want, people that are doing the work don't feel this way, are not treating people this way. This is the online voices of people that just want to be heard, like all of us, want to have an opinion, that are oftentimes being the strongest towards these newer players. And I want more people in the community. It helps me as a teacher, it helps me as a performer, it helps spread the handpan around. And I've never been afraid of these instruments coming to the US or to the UK and Europe, simply because it means expanding the community. And we cannot keep the world the way it was when I first started in the handpan world. It was very small. There was a handful of makers. Everybody knew each other. It was just a different world. It's not that world. And I think a lot of times the people that are upset is they're grasping for how it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not that. It's absolutely not that world anymore. Yeah. But the reality is, even for people that are kind of spicy about that, it benefits all of us to have more handpans in the world. The makers may not want to retune cheap instruments. Fine, that's a fair argument. I get it. But I didn't buy a $1,200 guitar when I first started to play guitar. I bought
Yeah.
like $100 Fender Squire. It was not the best instrument. It did the trick of getting my fingers to have calluses and be able to play. So the other truth is I've actually been involved with Chinese instruments long before I even talked about them at all, because I've used those instruments in group classes for a very, very long time. And great instruments. This is a huge topic, but there was a couple people that went to China that were working in some of the companies, I won't name the companies, that were producing very high quality instruments a long time ago. And I was friends with many of those people that were there. So there was a period before everyone realizes now you can get, pretty good quality instruments for a reasonable price. Before that time period, a lot of teachers that couldn't afford to spend $50,000 to get 20 handpans for groups, what do? So you start to look for ways of having instruments for group classes. I can't have a class if I don't have handpans.
Yeah.
So many of us had experience with Chinese instruments before the current iteration of that. So I already had that opinion of, maybe I would rather support all of my handpan maker friends 100% of the time. The reality is not everybody can afford it. So I think it's good to have multiple price points. And there's no shame for anybody watching this. Ignore the people that are being rude about it. There's no shame in owning whatever instrument, and people are welcome in the community regardless of their starting point. Always,
Yeah. When you go to a handpan festival or a handpan gathering, that attitude is not there.
Not at all.
Everybody is welcoming with open arms, and it's about connection and spreading the joy of music and being together and having a good time and encouraging and embracing everybody. If you had a message to people that were feeling self-conscious about the quality of their instrument, what would you say to them?
At least you have one. You have an instrument, so you have the opportunity to play it. And we're set up on the internet to need the validation of other people. And it's good to get that feedback. I've been grateful to get that feedback. But handpan seems to be, in the personal level, a very personal practice. And if you're not getting the feedback you want from the people in the community, you will certainly meet people that'll give you that feedback eventually. Yeah. And go to events if you can, because you're not going to experience the online behavior in person. Never, ever have I experienced that from anybody in in-person events. And last thought of that, online is not reality.
No.
The reality of people is that the personalities they manifest online, if I were to talk to any of those people in person, they would not behave that way in person. And I've had that encounter many times where there's been, whatever drama with whatever person, and you talk to them, and it's like, this was only enabled by the internet. It's an inhuman way of treating people oftentimes that happens on the internet, but in person there's no reality to that. So
if you could like invent a one simple community rule online for handpan related forums, what would you, to improve inclusivity, what would it be, and how? Just as an example,
No. One of the things that I kind of operate under for my own work is I'm not looking for feedback unless I ask for it.
Right.
So unless I say, tell me what you think of my, negative or positive, like I'm happy to receive whatever. If I ask for it, I want feedback. These people that are posting are not looking for that type of feedback. Even if they're asking for it, they're thinking they're going to get affirmation, excitement. I think people need to be mindful of, if someone's posting something, it doesn't mean that they're looking for your feedback necessarily. And if they're a new player, negative feedback is not going to do anything but dissuade them from being a part of the community. So at that one tagline, if people don't ask for feedback, don't give it. I think that's a good way of approaching that. Even on the swap and sale page, people will like launch into this it's like if someone's selling a handpan, they can whatever they can sell it for whatever they want. It's their instrument. I think I kind of live by that rule a little bit online. If someone asks me, I'm happy to talk about it, but
I mean, it's obviously growing online, right? TikTok is it's a huge platform that's growing massively, but I personally still haven't embraced it. I'm blaming my age.
I don't like it either. I feel like too much of a boomer for TikTok. But
apparently, so I was with I had a meeting the other day. A handpan player. He's earning good money streaming on TikTok.
Yeah,
it's very easy to get paid money by streaming and being. They've set up this whole platform apparently it's basically virtual busking, right? You're on there, you're playing, you're interacting, and you can get paid quite quickly and easily with the processes. It is a different world.
It is
that we are in. It is whether we like it or not, Ricky. People at our age, that it is an online community as well as an offline community. It will have continued impact, won't it, on the community and as the music grows on a whole, doesn't it?
Yep.
We're all sort of trying to find our way on there about how to sort of navigate it in the future. Do you think it will eventually improve the community online, or do you think it's always going to come up with new problems or areas that we need to sort of address?
I hope that, and I talk about this with my performer friends and teacher friends all the time. Those of us that really understand the state of the situation are too busy to be battling people online and countering opinions. And like I have a million other things I could be doing besides responding to some angry person. I think if more of us speak up as we're doing in this, like cut it out. Like a lot of people don't. There's a weird delicate balance that all of us have to play as people that are visible in the handpan world. I work with a bunch of sponsors, and there's a bunch of relationships I have to be aware of as I'm presenting myself on the internet. But I think if more people could speak up in the short term and be like, "Come on, we don't need to be doing that," that would help. And the other thing is too, I think moving more towards the handpan being an instrument and not just a spiritual tool, I think will help. Because I'm going to get flack from my spiritual people, but I think the spiritual community has a different relationship to the handpan than the musical community. I come from the musical community. I'm a spiritual person, but my approach is musical, and it's a spiritual experience, but I'm not approaching it as a yogi in that way. I think some of the annoyance comes from people in the past pulling the past into the present, like we talked about. I think there's the hyper spiritualization of the handpan that causes problems because there's some conflict with styles of playing and personalities in that way. And I also think that all musical communities have this critical relationship to players, whether it's mandolin or guitar. You see this type of behavior in all musical communities.
Okay.
And so my hope for the handpan community is that just that one thing I said, I think it will shift towards being so common that people are going to feel less threatened when there's a new player or when there's it really has to do, and again, I'm probably going to get flack for saying this, but
it doesn't matter. You have to speak your mind, don't you?
So I think that a lot of people, and if I were in a different position where I was in the past, I would maybe feel this way too. But if you had a handpan 15 years ago or 10 years ago, it was special. You were unique. You had people didn't have handpans before. To have that ripped away, like your sense of like, I'm in this tiny community, there's specialness to the fact that I have it. That's a big change. And so I think a lot of the drama is based around like, it doesn't feel as special. I don't feel like as cued into this tiny community anymore. So I think as it expands, it's going to become less like that and more kind of a big tent of people, hopefully.
I have come across something the other day that I wanted to share with you of a artisan maker pivoting with this situation of buying the pans in to the maker and then the maker retuning the Chinese handpan to give that quality control level and then reselling them as a artisan maker's handpan at a lower price point. So from that point of view, I thought that was interesting, because you're then having that quality control, which is apparently hit and miss a little bit still. Maybe even that opinion's out of date. But what the general consensus is, you could get a really good Chinese handpan, or a rubbish one might turn up. And I thought that's the first time I've heard an artisan maker pivot and say, I'm going to tune it until I'm happy with it, until I can say, this is I'm going to use my years of experience, and I'm going to put my own little signature on this piece of steel, which I've learned how to tune, and then I'm going to sell it at a lower price point than my own personal pans. That's a cool idea, isn't it? Do you think?
It's pretty common in the U.S.
Oh yeah,
there's 4 makers that are doing that in the U.S. right now. Whether publicly or not publicly.
Okay.
So it's I think the maker I think you're talking about, I work with some of these makers as well. I like the idea, because it's kind of like you're putting, even if you get a perfect instrument in the mail, you're checking it, you're saying, I agree to tune it. So the problem with Chinese instruments still is that there are many makers that, rightfully so, feel like, I don't want to put my time and my sound into an instrument like that. Okay, I understand the perspective. But if somebody puts their logo on it, suddenly that instrument is now in the same category as like, all right, it's quality enough that I'll retune it, or some other people will retune it. So you're kind of paying for the check, like you said, and the ability to hand it off to another maker and have them retune it without them being like, no thanks, I'm not going to touch that instrument. So it's smart. It's a smart way to adapt to a market that's tough for artisan makers, for sure. Yeah.
Change. We've talked about the importance of being open to change. It's the people that pivot and make these changes that succeed, as opposed to staying in one position and hoping things all stay the same.
Right.
So you're going to be obviously actively involved in the future of the scene coming forward. Yeah. How do you think you can see your influence and position helping the community in the future in, say, 5 years' time? Where would you like to see the community be in that time, and how are you going to be a part of doing that?
I would love, in the coming years, I need to spend more time in Europe and the UK. I haven't, it's just expensive to fly out of the darn US. It's once you're in Europe, it's cheap to be there. But I would love to continue to push the narrative of, it's okay to organize your playing. It's not going to limit you if you're an improv player. Because I've really seen a lot of success and seen a lot of other players to start to make things feel like a song. And it's easier to collaborate in groups if there's something tying it together. From jamming with people, somebody, either you or another person, has to kind of say like, all right, this is how we're going through this, and you're going to add on top of it. I think that perspective is really useful for people. Related to that, I think a lot of times when people buy an instrument and then sell it a month later, it's because they don't have something that makes them relate to that instrument. And I think the handpan community in general could deepen their connection by having a piece, whatever the piece is, on your scale that they can repeat. So I'd love to provide more of that type of education for the handpan world, and just try to include as many people as possible in the educational end of it, because we're just, you and I and everybody else are just at the beginning of a larger wave that's just going to increase in size. 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, I never would have imagined we would be in this spot. So just imagine 10 years from now what it's going to look like. It's going to be completely different than now. So I want to continue to ride that performance, teaching, educational journey, and include more people, as many people as I can in that, without making them feel like they're not welcome in that community, because that's important to me.
Ricky, it has been a pleasure talking to you finally on Handpan Voices. Thank you so much for all your time today. Where can people find out more about you? What's your contact details online, and where can people understand what you're doing a bit more?
Yeah. rewildyoursoulmusic.com is my website. You can get to my email and learn about my one-on-one online song-based lessons there, my courses that I have out. Also on Instagram and YouTube, Rewild Your Soul, all one word. And I also have 5 5 albums on Spotify and iTunes. Maybe not Spotify soon if I decide to follow the train of getting off of Spotify, but on streaming platforms, there's a bunch of different albums. One I would recommend you check out as well as Wild Spaces. We didn't talk about it in this chat, but I went to various acoustic spaces across the US, brought instruments that I felt like fit and recorded them in those spaces.
Nice.
I love that album. So Wild Spaces by Rewild Your Soul. That's one of my favorite recent releases. So
that sounds amazing. Well, we could definitely do a whole episode talking about where to play the handpan. Wow, that's incredible. Well, it's been a joy. And, you know, on behalf of all the people that you've taught the handpan to, thank you so much for all the things you do for the community, especially in the US, Ricky. Everybody appreciates what you're doing, and please keep it going, my friend. Keep it going.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you.